This is Emily Erin Davis, and today we're talking about what may be every parent's worst nightmare. Here in my home state of Virginia, where my own daughter just started high school, a scandal is rocking the suburbs of Washington, D.C. Allegations that a Fairfax County school, one of the largest and wealthiest school districts in America, has explosive allegations that have surfaced. School officials arranging and even funding abortions for underage girls, all without telling their parents. One young girl says she was told she, quote-unquote, had no choice. Another, just 17, was taken for an abortion behind her family's back, all without so much as a phone call to the parents. And yet, the district claimed it only learned of these allegations just days ago, even as evidence shows administrators knew for months. This isn't just about one school, one district, or one bad policy. This is about a dangerous agenda that's already shaping Virginia's next governor's race, and an extreme constitutional amendment being pushed by Democrats that would erase parental rights entirely when it comes to abortion. And this isn't just a local scandal, it's a warning. Virginia is the canary in the coal mine when it comes to parental rights. And in the post-Roe era, these battles aren't abstract. They're about whether parents will be cut out of the most life-altering decisions for their children, or whether elected representatives will stand up to defend families. As voters in Virginia prepare to choose new leaders, including the next governor, these stories aren't just shaping policy, they're shaping the future of parental rights in America. This is Exposed, Abortion in America, Season 4, Post-Roe, The Next Battle. And you're listening to Episode 6, When Schools Hide Abortions, What Virginia Means for America. Joining me is independent investigative journalist Walter Curt, founder of the WC Dispatch, and the reporter who broke this story on the Virginia school abortion trafficking. It broke it wide open. So Walter was given exclusive access to whistleblower documents, firsthand testimony from a very courageous individual who tried to repeatedly sound the alarm. And the evidence showed that top Fairfax County officials knew far more than what they claimed. His investigation has exposed not only what happened behind closed doors in the high school, but also a broader fight for parental rights in Virginia. Walter, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on.
So, Walter, sounds like you were given exclusives on this story. I want our audience to understand what is even going on in Virginia. A lot of the listeners aren't even in Virginia, but this is something that they should pay attention to for many reasons, because it's kind of a canary in the coal mine for parental rights, particularly on abortion. So can you walk us through, how did you even first learn about this, and why did you know that this is something that you had to investigate?
So the way that I actually found out about this story in the first place was kind of unique because I wasn't even supposed to really be covering this. I was in Richmond, Virginia for a completely different story. And a source of mine said he wanted to meet. So I said, okay, well, what do you got for me? And he shows me a letter. It's a handwritten letter in Spanish. And I quickly had it translated and read it. And it was so shocking to me that I didn't believe him. And then he connected me with the teacher. And the teacher tells me this whole story and then tells me the even more sinister part of the story, which was the 5-month pregnant girl that didn't even want an abortion. And they tried to convince her and tell her she had to do it anyway. So that's when this became a serious investigation to me.
Wow. And for our listeners, can you just lay out kind of the who, what, where, when, why, the facts of the case as it is?
Yeah. So there's two. The story is in Fairfax, Virginia, at a Centerville High School. There's 2 minor girls that were taken to get abortions, or taken to an abortion clinic, and then coerced into getting abortions. One of them went through with it. The other did not. So both of them were taken there and coerced and set up and facilitated by the school, and no one's parents were involved in any of these decision making. And that's horrible because in Virginia, that is illegal, actually. That's a felony in Virginia.
Right, exactly. So can you lay out the timeline just a little bit? I mean, this has been years, correct? I mean, this is something that has just been swept under the rug for so long.
That's right. So the timeline is pretty extensive, to be honest with you. So The initial story that this came from was actually a 2021. So there's the 17-year-old that is in the signed letter that I have. That's the other girl. I don't have the exact date on that one because she didn't want to mention it. But this one they're both minors at the time. But the one that we have the full facts on is that she was 17. This is in 2021. So 2022, the teacher, Miss Perez, which is the hero in this scenario, she's the whistleblower that came forward with this stuff, presents this information because apparently, this is at the end of 2021 when that happened, and the girl came to her saying she might have had complications. She was having pain and stuff like that. So she confided all this information in her, and the teacher took it to the principal. She took it to Chad Lehman, which is the principal at the high school at that time. He's since been promoted, by the way. He's now executive principal at Region 5 in Fairfax County Schools. But so she took the information there, and absolutely nothing was done about it. They didn't look into it. They swore he was going to, this is really bad, but they didn't do anything. So flash forward a bit further than that, the Perez starts talking about it again, and they start trying to pressure her to be quiet about it. They start trying to get her to stop. They start trying to have students show up in her office asking her for strange questions that are outside of the means of where the teacher should be able to do, trying to get her to resign. So it was pretty clear that they were trying to come after her, and Miss Perez started documenting everything. She started really writing everything down. She made sure she had recordings of every conversation she was in. And this woman is really a hero because, she's actually really a unique teacher in this scenario, too, because she is a Cuban immigrant that fled communism. So she knows what it's like when you're in a scenario where everyone around you is trying to come after you for something. So she is just a very unique teacher in this scenario, and was willing to stand up for these people. And it took her, 3 real years of going through this before it actually finally managed to break out into the open. And now we have an investigation from Governor Youngkin that has really brought this into the forefront. So I'm very happy to see that Governor Youngkin brought that out, and I'm hoping that we see some real accountability for this.
Yeah, Walter, can you expand a little bit on what Governor Youngkin announced and what actions he's taking right now?
Yes. Yeah, so Governor Youngkin, this is 1 week after the initial story dropped, Governor Youngkin has now announced that the state police is opening a formal investigation into Fairfax County schools, and they're going to start looking into these people and see what's going on. And that's crucial in my eyes, because if you look at Fairfax's history, this school in particular is actually very bad about cover-ups. Now, the series of articles that I did on the Fairfax story walks people through that. It shows, the initial story dropped. I waited for Fairfax to try and say that they'd never heard of it before. Then I dropped another article that had the audio recording of Miss Perez telling them back in May. So that blew their cover story yet again. And then I sent out the more recent article, which was talking about the email that they're trying to get her to bring it into a confidential attorney to make it a confidential investigation. So the cover-up was their intention, but Governor Youngkin is not going to allow that to happen with the state police involved.
Yeah. Walter, what did you think when you saw the statement from Fairfax County schools claiming that they had, quote unquote, just learned about this in August? I mean, what was your reaction?
That was exactly what I was waiting for. I wanted them to do that. I knew that they would, so I was waiting for them. So, the moment that they released that, and not only did they release that, they also said that on, large platforms. They told Laura Ingram's, the Ingram angle. So they told them, we've never heard of this. This wouldn't be acceptable. They told Nick Minock that it wouldn't be acceptable. So I waited for them to dig themselves into the hole, and then I immediately released the recording showing that they knew about it months ago.
Wow. That's amazing. This is very reflective for me. And as a Virginia parent, I just sent my daughter back to high school this week, Mm-hmm. So this is like a parent's worst nightmare. It's terrifying. And I don't think this is just for Virginia parents. However, I do think it would be helpful. I remember prior to the election, the serious story that broke, and I don't remember who broke it, out of Loudoun County, though. Do you mind just sharing why we have such heartburn in Virginia with schools just demolishing parental rights?
Yeah, well, Loudoun County was the big flashpoint last time, because that was there was the gender issue where a young boy pretending to be a girl raped a girl in a bathroom, and they tried to cover that up. So that was the previous time that we had issues in Northern Virginia schools. But they're all having these problems. In fact, Loudoun County is still, at this very moment, they're fighting the Title IX reforms that the Trump administration are putting out. They announced that they're going to try and fight it in court. So, they're not giving up on this radical ideology that they've brought themselves into. They're going to fight it tooth and nail, and they're hoping that they can get Spanberger in office so that way they can try and fight it on a statewide scale.
I absolutely want to get into, just the legislative implications, what this means with the upcoming elections in Virginia. But before we move in that direction, I do want to spend a moment on Ms. Perez, because you're right. She's absolutely the hero in this story. And I think one who, I hope other people follow her lead, but sadly, we haven't really seen that a lot lately. Do you mind just reflecting really quickly in greater detail about how important what she did was and is, and how it needs to be the model going forward for other teachers?
Absolutely. This woman, she, like I said before, she is a Cuban immigrant, and she understood this stuff at a deep foundational level that, she needed to be careful and she needed to be meticulous and take notes and stand up for this. And she did a great job. I can't, no one can argue with the results. She has documented evidence all the way through this whole process because she knew one day it would somehow get out there and she would be on the right side of it. And she was. And she was absolutely on the right side of this, standing up for kids. Her thing was that she specifically saw this as abuse of the kids. She didn't like the abuse that was happening. She thought it was wrong. She thought it was completely wrong that the parents weren't informed, and how on earth could anybody live with themselves by doing that? And she came forward with it. And Ms. Perez and I have been in contact consistently throughout this. I've been helping her, making sure that they don't pressure her into doing things. And I'm more than willing to stand up with her. And, I don't care if the Fairfax County comes after me or her, we'll fight it. So I'm happy to be on her side with this, and I'm more than willing to work with any teacher that does that. So I hope that's the model going forward, that people are willing to come forward. And I've had other people come forward, including some former students that have some information for me. And then I've also had another teacher that I haven't had time to reach out to yet. She wanted to speak with me about another issue going on in Fairfax. So hopefully we see a lot more.
Yeah, and I think that the way that you have laid out this case for people to understand and to see has been very wise. Can you speak to why it was important to present the evidence and present the testimonies in pieces?
Yeah, absolutely. The big thing to remember when you're trying to get something like this out there is that you put the shocking information out first, and that gets everyone's eye. But then they start, if they're really interested by it, they're going to go look for more information, and that's why you drip it out slow. You don't want to actually just feed and dump all of it out all at once, because that doesn't really, people don't digest it, and even if they do, they kind of move past it. But when you're dealing with a scenario where you've got corrupt people that are trying to cover something up, that's the reason that we waited until they had a full response. So, they actually responded with the superintendent of the school, who has her own problems. She actually signed that statement that they put out saying that they would never stand for this sort of stuff, even though we are well aware that she knew about it, that the entire organization knew about it, that their investigators knew about it. We got them dead to rights on that. And that's, I think, what really led to the investigation being opened as a result of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, here in Virginia, we're heading into a high-stakes governor's race with Abigail Spanberger, who incidentally was my former Congress member here in the district with Fredericksburg, Virginia, versus Winsome Sears. So when Spanberger was asked directly about parental consent for abortion, she refused to answer. And she was asked by CBS, which I thought was very interesting recently. So, in your opinion, Walter, how could this scandal and her silence resonate with Virginia voters and especially parents?
Well, silence is a real big problem for them. They're hoping that their plan is they're hoping that the abortion issue, that the Republicans won't touch it. But the deal is that Republicans may not want to bring this up, but if you bring up parental rights, that's what really wins people over. And she's going to have to respond to it at some point. But the problem is for Spanberger is that she has boxed herself in this corner because she knows that this constitutional amendment would remove parental rights from this. So she can't support it and support the amendment at the same time. It's contradictory. So she is really boxed herself into a corner, and you can see that she has refused to respond to this stuff. But that's not abnormal for her. I mean, there's other things that are coming out right now that she is still not responding to. So, and she just backed out of the debate. So I don't expect it to be, very pretty for her very soon.
Yeah, Walter, why do you think she backed out of the debate with CNN up against Lieutenant Governor Winsome Sears?
Well, I'm not going to give myself full credit for this, but it's very possible that she saw what I just released yesterday and decided that it was a bad idea. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you witnessed any of the new things that I've just released about the fact that her entire campaign is embroiled in a defamation lawsuit. All of her campaign staff have been deposed, and they've all admitted to most of this stuff in court. And Spanberger herself has been deposed and is attempting to seal her deposition from the public. So it's very possible that she figured out that came out, and that's why she wanted to stay away from the debate. My thought is that she's going to try and hide her way through this and pull the Joe Biden where she doesn't actually do any campaigning and just hopes that her friends around the area pull her through it.
So the Virginia basement strategy, I suppose. I
think so. It seems like it. I mean, I've seen her campaign events. Do you see any people at them? I don't.
Yeah. However, I will say, I am a bit concerned because I do know, especially in my district, where she used to be over, people, I hear them comment on, oh, well, at least she's more moderate. But that just tells me that they're not really cluing into her actions and, what she is voting for and standing for. Can you speak to why she's tried so hard to label herself as a moderate, but that couldn't be further from the truth?
That's the biggest problem, really, with the Democrat machine. Really, they paint themselves however they want, and they seem to be reasonably good, mostly because they have their friends in the media to hide the stuff for them. Try to paint and tell people, oh yeah, we're moderates. We don't believe in all that radical, crazy stuff. Look, I'm nice. I've got kids and a family and blah 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 blah. But all you have to do is look at her record. And you have to get that out to people. You've got to show that she voted 100% in favor of the girls and boys, boys and girls sports. She voted against all of the stuff from Trump. She is the typical Democrat machine radical, and she has been like that her whole career. I mean, she has a direct statement where she says she was celebrating transgenderism in the military. You can't get more radical than transgenders in the military. That there is no more radical position than saying that, we need confused men and women in our armed service, and they're a source of strength for our military. No, they are not. And there is no more radical position than that stuff. But somehow she's tried to run this campaign, and I think it's starting to get through to people that maybe that's not the case because, I'm seeing a lot more activity over the past month or so since I got involved trying to make sure people understand what's going on down there, that, people are starting to pick up on the fact that we can't have this, CIA radical asset sitting in the governor's mansion.
Yeah, and I think it's worth stating, clearly I'm pro-life, but what she's standing for, even if you were a quote-unquote pro-choice voter, I mean, the radicalism on the lack of parental consent or even notification, not even something so simple as notification, she won't even co-sign on or vote for. That's really radical. I mean, even for Virginia is pretty liberal, unfortunately, when it comes to abortion, but that's really radical.
This to me is the biggest issue. And when I saw this case, this is what I looked at it. I was like, oh my God, this is horrible. You got to think about it. So for all the listeners out there, if you're trying to discuss this case with somebody, take the abortion aspect completely out of the scenario for a moment, right? Now, ask this question. What scenario would you be okay with your daughter being on an operating table under anesthesia without you knowing about it? Because that is exactly what would have happened if the 5-month pregnant girl had gone through with that procedure. A 5-month pregnancy is not just a simple procedure. No. You've got to go on the operating table for a 5-month pregnancy. So she would have been under anesthesia. She would have been, a full surgical procedure could have happened to your daughter without you ever knowing about it. And that is beyond the pale for me. I don't know how anyone would ever be okay with that. I mean, there is no scenario where that's acceptable.
Right. I mean, to be clear, we're talking about 20 plus weeks here, which, as Democrats love to say, viability, that is almost the point of viability, where the child could survive outside of the womb. This is not an early abortion by any means. So this is, terrifying to think that not only did she get pushed into a later abortion, but also, as I understand it, Walter, it wasn't like the students even wanted this, correct?
Yeah, the one student that ran from the facility, she did not want this, and she actually fled the facility. As you know, they essentially they got her there. They were trying to convince her this is the only choice you've got. This you must do this, and the girl ran from the clinic. I mean, how horrifying is that? I mean, I don't even know what to say when I hear this sort of stuff. That's what, to me, if there wasn't so much other evidence surrounding the entire story, it would have been too much for me to believe it. But just the way that everything's been documented, the way that everything's been laid out, the witnesses I've talked to, it is happening. And you need to realize that if there is 2 cases like this that we know about, how many do we not know about? And I think that's the question that I keep asking, and I would love to hear the answer to that. And I think Mr. Youngkin is going to figure that out for us.
I think that's a really excellent point, because what we often find when we're talking to people, and our partner organizations are talking to people during election season, is that there's a believability issue on some of these things. Like, some of these actions are so extreme, and they're just unbelievable. But people, you have to believe it. It actually is happening, and you've got the receipts and documents to prove it. As hard as it is to confront, we just got to.
I agree with you. The believability is a problem, and most of that becomes because a lot of people, when they cover this sort of stuff, they don't provide enough evidence. Like, one of the things that I really strive for when I do my reporting, especially in any investigative pieces, I want you to see exactly why I came to my conclusions from the source document itself. Not some sort of random idea, not some extemporaneous evidence or anonymous sources. No. The teacher is on the record, willing to say publicly. She has said it in recordings and in videos and in statements and in multiple different scenarios to multiple different witnesses, all of these things that she's saying. If there wasn't a signed letter, you wouldn't have this same sort of thing. You've got a signed letter from one of the girls admitting that this happened. She did go through with an abortion. This girl was taken to the facility by the social worker, Carolina Diaz. All of it is written down, signed, documented, and then supported by multiple witnesses that have talked to these people directly. So, if you want to make sure that you get a story out there, give the people all of it, and don't try and cut it up and make sure they don't see it. You've got to put it all to their face and say, this is happening. You got to look at it and make sure you look at it. And if you ignore it, then you're not going to listen anyway.
Yes, and you do a brilliant job of laying that out for everyone. So anyone who's listening, I encourage you to subscribe and go to the WC Dispatch. Walter, all of his reporting is there on this case and other things as well, and you can see what he's laying out. But it's critical, especially for Virginians as we're about to go into elections. Speaking of, it's really important, we have Women Speak Out Virginia on the ground, knocking on over 150,000 doors, educating voters on how to stop Democrats from having a majority in the House of Delegates. And the reason why that is so important, it's critical right now, is because they're pushing for a constitutional amendment that would wipe out parental consent entirely. So if this situation terrifies you, if this is a nightmare for you as a parent, this is what you can anticipate. And this is not hyperbole. This is what you can anticipate if this gets through. Because along with it will wipe out health protections for women and girls. And like I said, parental consent and notification entirely. And this is the kind of stuff that Ms. Bamberger will not get on the record to say. She'll vote for it, but she won't answer it in a media interview, unfortunately, which is, kind of evading what she says she believes in. So in light of what happened, Walter, what would that mean in practice for families across the state if this constitutional amendment went through? If what you're reporting on happens entirely?
If what I'm reporting happens entirely, if there is no parental consent, you have to understand what no parental consent means, and you need to understand the language of these radicals that are in what happens when they get in charge. The way that they write these constitutional amendments, and I just went through this and out here in Ohio, When they passed the constitutional amendment out here, people weren't paying attention. They were all riled up about it, and they didn't have the proper messaging, and it did not go well for us. And people need to realize that the way that they write this in is they write it in so that reproductive care can't be given any burden at all. There can be no burden at all to have reproductive care, and that's how they write the language. But that's a broad brush. That allows all sorts of strange things to be done. And if you're in a blue state, that you've got a blue court, and they don't restrict and make sure that it's very, very tight and stringent, what ends up happening as a result of that is you get a scenario where reproductive care includes transgender surgeries, includes transgender puberty blockers. It includes all of these things that they refuse to talk about and they know are unpopular, but they think that they've got the winning issue on abortion, so that's how they cover it.
You have a really interesting perspective since you do have that Ohio connection. This is a perfect example of what happened in Ohio, which could easily happen here in Virginia, which is just the extension of even more abortion to minors, like was skillfully crafted in that amendment in Ohio and is now sadly and tragically on the books. That could also happen here. And that's what the alarm that we are sounding, because we see that coming and that canary in the coal mine, and we just don't want that to happen, at the very least here in Virginia. Walter, what happens now with all of this information that you have brought to light? What happens now? Where do the investigations stand? And what do we need to be on the watch for in the weeks ahead?
Well, the next thing that I think you're going to see is, I've been waiting to see what Fairfax County schools, what they're actually going to say now that there's a state police investigation into them. Because what they tried to do, and this was the final article that I did in that series, the Fairfax series, is talk about bringing in their fixer, which is a woman named Mary McGowan, which is a longtime operative that works for the school boards trying to cover cases, and she's got an extensive CV of making sure that there was summary judgment in favor of the school board. So they were trying to go after Ms. Perez to get her to be quiet and to get her to send all of the documentation and everything that she has over to her to keep it in a confidential investigation. And what they were going to do there is they were going to say it's then attorney-client privilege, and this is something they've already done in past cases. Actually, so they've done this before. But with the state police investigation open, now they're in a bind because, there's not the local DA that's going to be looking into them. It's not the attorney general's office that's going to be looking into them. It's the state police. And the state police can go straight to a Fairfax Healthcare Center and demand that they see their financial transactions. And I think if you see financial transactions from anywhere in state funding from the school, then they're dead to rights. I think that's it. You might be able to get arrests out of that. So I'm looking forward to seeing what Mr. Youngkin brings forward with the investigation, and I'm going to be watching it very closely. To me, I want to see real accountability for this, and people deserve to know what's going on. Parents need to be following this and need to be paying attention, because these schools, they really believe that your kids are their property while they're at school. And that is just not true, and it never was true, and people need to be reminded of that, and they need to be reminded of that.
Right. Well, this is fascinating, equal parts fascinating and equal parts terrifying. So, Walter, thank you for sounding the alarm on this. Everyone needs to pay attention, not just if you're a Virginian, but this could also come to your state. So, unfortunately, let us stand as a symbol of what could happen. And Walter, keep doing great reporting. We're going to be paying attention. Please, everybody, go subscribe to WC Dispatch. And just thank you again, and a huge thanks to the heroism of Ms. Perez. And I hope that there are more teachers out there like her that find their courage.
Absolutely, I do too. And if any of them ever want to come forward, I'm more than willing to work with any of them. So I hope that's known to everybody. But thank you for having me on. This is a great talk.
That's all for today's episode of When Schools Hide Abortions, What Virginia Means for America. But the fight and the conversation doesn't stop here. In our next episode, we'll take you behind the headlines for another critical story in the post-Roe landscape. Stay tuned, make sure you're subscribed, and join us as we continue to shine a light on the battles for life happening right now in America. That's next time on Exposed, Abortion in America, Season 4, Post-Roe, The Next Battle. Until then, keep standing, keep speaking, keep fighting for life.